Hello and welcome to this very special edition of Abir Pothi Samvad. Today we have a very special guest, Dr. Alka Pandey. She is the chief curator in India Habitat Center, where they run two galleries. She has done an amazing work of creating 108 portraits of around Indian culture and philosophy and art. And before this, if I introduce her to you, she has been teaching in Punjab University, art and aesthetics. She has got Knight of the Order of Arts and Letters, the Australian Indian Council Special Award, Chandigarh Lalit Kala Academy Honours, and she has also been curating exhibitions, awarded the SEMA Lifetime Achievement Award. She's currently, as I said, she's head of the Visual Art Gallery in India Habitat Center. And the last big thing she did was she started the Bihar Museum Binale, which was talked all over India and abroad. Welcome, Dr. Pandey, and we will start with this humongous amount of work which you are doing, this 108 portraits of Indian uh, um, different themes, art, architecture, sculpture, and so on. So I would want you to start talking about that first. It's quite an ambitious work, and I'm totally boggled at how somebody can kind of attempt and think about it and also like bring it to fruition.
So, this work is something very special to me, and it is very personal to me. More than being part of my professional life, it's something which I've lived with for more than 30 years. I began teaching history of art in Punjab University more than 30 years ago, and I've been very, very deeply immersed in it, more so after I got my postdoctoral fellowship from the Charles Wallace in 2000, when I went to a very, very cutting edge place called Goldsmiths College, University of London, to do a postdoc. The internet was just happening in 2000. We don't realize that the internet is so young. And at that time, the just the very beginnings and glimmerings of internet were happening. We didn't know much about the rest of the world. So when I went from Punjab University, complete with a PhD, being head of the Department of Fine Arts, being catapulted into this university in London, to a college which was known for its very avant-garde thought. And at that time, it was not even the structuralist philosophy, but it was the post-structuralist philosophy of Deleuze and Guattari. The book was called A Thousand Plateaus, and that was doing the rounds. And why I mentioned internet was that, we were really, West was West and East was East. So there was a big gap. Today, if I were to go back to Goldsmiths, I'd be very comfortable because I have the internet and I know everything what is happening. So when I go to Goldsmiths at that time, I was completely lost, and I actually lost my voice because I thought मैं तो अनपढ़ गंवार हूँ, मुझे वेस्टर्न फिलोसफी के बारे में नहीं पता, मुझे सीमियोटिक्स के बारे में, आर्ट हिस्ट्री में नहीं पता है, I do not know anything about signs and signifiers. It was a whole new world for me. So I struggled, and at first I was thinking of coming back, but being a resilient Indian and a woman at that, I stayed on. And within 3 months, I got my voice back. And in the next 9 months, I actually came back equipped. Not an expert, but enough to know about the Western thought process. I came back in 2000, it was a year long, and I struggled for the next 5 years trying to find my place in the sun. It was the time when I also worked on the Documenta 11 with Okwi and Wizoa, did a platform on truth and reconciliation at the Habitat Center, and I thought I was getting there. At the same time, I was also, I was on leave, a sabbatical from Punjab University, and I was working at the Habitat Center as a consultant. But that was also the time when I was teaching arts and aesthetics at the College of Art. there was a very interesting paper which I used to teach in the fourth year of my teaching these students. It was called The Interrelationship Between the Plastic and Performing Arts. Now, when you say plastic arts, you think of painting, you think of sculpture, you think of printmaking. You don't think of anything more. And you talk of performing arts, you think of music and dance. Now, how do the two meet? Because my entire education was based more on Western lines. I studied in a convent school, went to a primarily English-speaking college, was quite removed from my own culture, knew more about Shakespeare and the poets like Keats and Wordsworth, Thomas Hardy in my days, Charles Dickens, rather than knowing about Kalidas or the Riti-Kalin poetry of our times. I was just lucky that in post-independent India, I grew up in a traditional home which was very forward-looking, but my mother was a trained musician of the Gwalior Gharana. So I grew up listening to the sounds of Riyaz in the morning.
Where were you growing up?
I grew up in Delhi primarily. For 3 years I was in Kanpur, then grew up in Delhi and Mumbai. Having said that, I also learned Bharatanatyam from Yamini Krishnamurthy. So this performing arts helped me while teaching the plastic and the performing arts. It was while I started refining my teaching, I understood that this is my area which I'm going to now concentrate on. So after 20 years of being in the field of fine art historical practice, I decided that I'm now not going to run after Western ideology the way I was. It's not that I'm going to discard it, but I thought that I'm going to be more comfortable with Indian arts and aesthetics. It's like, as I love to give this example, seeing Aishwarya Rai wearing a Galliano gown on the catwalks of Cannes and watching Nandita Das or Sharmila Tagore wearing a beautiful Indian sari there. So you feel more comfortable. I felt more comfortable with my own aesthetics. My grandfather was a scholar of Pali. I used to see my grandmother making icons of worship for the rituals of prayers, because when we were growing up about more than 55 years ago, we used to see our grandparents doing puja part, having a puja room. And I'm not talking of religion coming into the arts, but it's about a cultural identity. And the Puranic Kathas being told, morning and evening Aarti. There were festivals like a Nauchandika Mela in Meerut, where I used to go a lot for my summer holidays, watching the performers, watching, the bharts, watching Ramayana being enacted in the neighborhood. So we saw culture in a very, very different way. And when I look at the turn of the 21st century, I see that there was getting a widening gap between the East and the West, because our system of education was still very much oriented with the British system of education, which had been laid down by the British over here. Now, I don't have anything anti to say to that, because that was the spirit of the times. I learnt a lot. I understood our papers used to come from England, because I did the Indian Senior Cambridge, ISC, but we never felt that we were being colonized, because that was what the spirit of the times was, and I learnt a lot. But I thought now, at the turn of the 21st century, time had come that we now turn the lens to ourselves. And while turning the lens to myself, I thought, and having taught for more than 30 years, Punjab University, the Delhi College of Art, guest faculty at the National School of Design, at the DJ Academy of Art and Design, and at the National Institute of Fashion Technology, the NIIFT in Mohali, where I taught fashion, the study of fashion design within clothing. You know, there was a history of Indian clothing, there was a history of Western costume. So teaching all that, I realized that while the young people are curious and some of them are good some of them are good students, because in the arts, let me tell you, the worst come to the arts. It is literally a weeding out. When I say worst, I don't mean that's not the right word to use. A different lot of people come into the art. These are people who have not reached academic success, because the top ones go into IIT. Now they're going into BBAs.
More secure options.
Secure options being lawyers, doctors, also not just secure, but money making.
Yeah.
You know, you become a corporate, you have lots of money. So the ones who academically did not excel, they would say, art karne do. Hostel mein kamra mil jayega. You know, things like that. So there was already a pre-selection happening. So the ones who came in to do, and I'm talking of the people I taught, they were people who were not academically oriented, but many of them were truly creative, gifted, because in NID also there was a selection. You had to go through a very, very difficult exam to get into NID, even at the National Institute of Fashion Technology. So they used to think differently. What I realized while teaching them, they were all learning everything. Education was coming from the West. So I go back to my original subject, which I was teaching, the relationship between plastic and performing arts. Where did it come from? It came from the Natya Shastra. And I realized that everything, the understanding of traditional Indian art, and to a large extent of modern and contemporary too, because there is an unbroken tradition of artistic practice in India, and we go back to traditional art in India. So you cannot keep the Indian aesthetics out. And where did the understanding and appreciation of Indian aesthetics come from? From the Natya Shastra. Where did the Rasa theory come from, which is a common tool of understanding both the plastic and performing arts? The Natya Shastra. The Navarasas come from the Natya Shastra. And then through the years, whether it is the Rasikapriya of Keshavadas, which tells you about, again, the Ashtanayikas. So all aspects of the understanding of Indian art came from the Chitrasut, came from the Natya Shastra, came from the Puranic storytellings that we had. The iconography of images came from our Shilpa Shastras. The Indians had canons for everything. We had canons, we had rules for everything. For example, the Shad Anga theory, which is used for figures, whether it is painting or sculpture. The 6 limbs of art: head, 2 hands, torso, and 2 legs. So we have very, very specific canons, and even for the iconography, very, very specific canons are laid out in Indian systems of image making. So I thought that why should we not bring all this visible? Why should this lie only in the domain of Sanskrit scholars and Hindi speaking scholars, people who are doing Hindi literature, whether it is Chayavad Kavita, Riti Kaleen poetry, or even modern poetry? Why should we not be conversant with this? Our students, even today, are running after the West. Many, many ideas are coming from there. So in a way, this kind of cultural nationalism which is happening had to happen, but this is also not just the right way. What is very important is to have the right education. Being an educator all my life, particularly an arts educator, I mean, when you introduced me, you said I was a curator, author, writer, but I think the greatest role I can play, or my greatest legacy which I can leave, is that of a teacher, because that gives me the greatest joy of also sharing my knowledge. So these 14 books come out of my 30 years of this journey which I've just told you. And all of them, whether it is on Indian, these are all on all these disciplines, or all these subjects are looked through the lens of Indian arts and aesthetics. That is why I took the number 108. Why 108? 108 is a sacred number. The minute you say 108, you think of Indic wisdom. It is a branding. That is why I did 108. 108 की अक्षरमाला होती है. 108 are the 108 energy points in the Sri Yantra, in the two inverted triangles. So 108 becomes very, very Indian, and looking at culture and heritage became very important for me, because I'm not just looking at the fine art practice of art making. I'm not looking at modern and contemporary, because India is very unique. In India, you have folk art, you have tribal art, you have what is called traditional art, you have modern and contemporary. But everything is art.
Yeah.
So, whether you are putting them in silos of folk art, traditional art, rock art, petroglyphs, whatever you are doing, it is all coming for me in the wide ecosystem of contemporary art, because these are all living traditions. Nothing is dead. In fact, in the West, you have eraser with the past, but here we do not have any eraser with the past.
There's a continuity for everything.
Not only a continuity, there are pockets where people are living in the most organic way without industry and technology having gotten there. So this is what is unique of India. India is not just a country, it's a continent. And the diversity and the plurality of the country is absolutely, how should I say, it's mind-blowing. Adbhut rasa hai isme. So what you see in these books is really my own essence, my own. इसमें मैंने अपनी जिंदगी का रस डाल दिया है. Whatever I have learnt, whatever I have taught, whatever I have seen, I have put it in these 14 books. So music, dance, objects, design, photography, traditional art, indigenous art, textiles. This all comes under the umbrella of visual culture. Of course, I don't have theatre, because I don't think I have that expertise, even though I look at the Natya Shastra, but I don't know enough about what happened with Parsi theatre, Marathi theatre, all those things. So I did not attempt that. I do not have a book on Indian cinema, which is another world in itself. But these 14 books, if you want to know anything about architecture, that's another book I've done. So anything you need to know, from the built heritage to the hand-painted heritage in India, you get your toes wet by looking at these books.
This helps to kind of paraphrase, and connect the world which doesn't know about these Indian traditions probably to.
Well, you're right about that. But basically, for me, it is to sensitize the people about the beauty and the inclusiveness of the Indian way of thinking, Indian philosophy, Indian thought, Indian art practice, and also to show the world how cosmopolitan and how universal we are. It's not that it is only limited to the subcontinent. Yes, in traditional art, how many people will understand the concept of a Dashabhuja Durga and a 10-headed Ravan? So that is why Partha Mitra wrote the book Much Maligned Monsters, because people in the West do not understand this concept, because we are also about myths and legends, and all of them have a reason why. They may not be written history, but they talk of the cultural thinking of the people and the culture of every geography, every region that you grow up, every district, every state, then the nationhood. There is a cultural mapping and a cultural identity to that. So these books help you discover the cultural mappings which are present in our beautiful country. I mean, A.L. Basham had written a book called The Wonder That Was India. I like to say the wonder that is India.
That's great. Coming to your curatorial work, I mean, this Patna, Bihar Museum was a great kind of, Binale was a great event, and now you're saying that you're going to do something similar in Patna. So what was that? How was that experience, and how did you think about it? I think that was the first Binale Patna was seeing, right?
Yeah. So things like this is always, जो ideas की उत्पत्ति होती है वो इंसान से शुरू होती है. It always starts with a person. So in Bihar, I met this a great visionary called Anjani Kumar Singh, who was the Chief Secretary of the state. Now he's the advisor to the Chief Minister still, Shri Nitish Kumar ji, and he was responsible for ensuring that the vision of the Chief Minister Nitish Kumar is completed by way of this beautiful museum called the Bihar Museum, an extraordinary museum made in post-independent India by a Japanese architect called Fumio Komaki. And it's extraordinary because in the main city of Patna, you have this absolute modern building which talks of the glory of Bihar and is using particular materials which reflect the imperial grandeur of Bihar. Bihar, as you know, in many ways was, or Patliputra to Patna, Patliputra, Magad, these were the areas situated in Bihar, and Bihar was the first place where the Republic was born, where the 16 Mahajanapadas were brought under one imperial control by Chandragupta Maurya. So you have there's so much of richness in Bihar, the artifacts in Bihar. So the museum became a perfect backdrop to develop the Bihar Museum Biennale, which was developed as a vision of Sri Anjani Kumar Singh, and I executed it, and we decided that there is a Kochi Biennale, there's an art biennale, there are many biennales, but nobody has really looked at the museum. And the museum today, not just in India, but all over the world, is becoming a laboratory of ideas, it's being transformed and changed. It is no longer an archaeological museum where you just put antiquities and you just let it be. It is a very, very dynamic space. There's a great amount of a visitor experience which happens there. There is a great dialogue between objects and the viewer. Sometimes museums don't even have objects. There is a museum of sense happening. There's a museum of taste which is taking place. So there are many kinds of museums which are coming across the world. So the ecosystem of museum itself is giving great food for thought, and museums across the country and the world are creating new vectors of knowledge and information. So to have debates around the museum, about the museum, and what the museum or curatorial strategies can be of museums became very, very interesting, and we got a fabulous response. We got, for the last Biennale, we had the president of GIME, we had the person from the Humboldt Center in Germany, we had people from Abu Dhabi, we had people from Australia, we had actually everybody. We had the architect who did the Halavarde, who was in the design team of Jean Nouvel, who had done the Louvre Abu Dhabi. So we had everybody with us, and we talked a lot about it, and great debates happened, and there was a lot of learning and sharing.
So
but what I'm doing now is that the old Patna Museum, which was set up in 1917, is also undergoing a great change, and with Drona, who is responsible for bringing out the conservation of the newly or the renovated Patna Museum, I'm curating an outdoor sculpture park, which is going to show some of the most beautiful sculptures from the 5th or 6th century. In fact, I've been working on the panels right here you will see we have divided it into different cultural groups like Anga.
Saran.
Yes, all of these. So this is the work I'm doing and putting objects, and we've got fabulous objects in Patna. So the Patna Museum is actually going to be from post Buxar, 1764 to present times. And we're going to have a huge Ganga gallery there. So we're going to talk about what happens around the Ganga, life around the Ganga, minerals, all kinds of artifacts which have been found on this cultural mapping of the Ganga. And then, of course, the great Chhat Puja will also be shown in the Ganga gallery.
So tell me about your curator's work, because then you're also like heading it in it's a very important place in Delhi, this Habitat Center, and there are 2-3 galleries here. So how do you see the current Indian art scene, and also in terms of how the world sees Indian art? Because as we move towards deeper into places like Patna, and I can see this book on Jangar which you wrote. So these are like kind of new, people are going deeper into Indian art, and therefore they are getting to. How is this process happening? How do you see this?
Well, actually, I see it as a whirlpool. There's so much happening in India. And even though I've been completely dedicated to Indian art and culture, I'm overwhelmed. But while I'm overwhelmed, I'm really grateful that I'm there, because, you look at Hampi at one end, you look at Khajuraho on the other, you look at the temple of Chidambaram near Pondicherry. You look at this whole area of the temples in Orissa, in Bhubaneswar.
Yeah.
You go every state you go to, you're overwhelmed. And this is just the built heritage. You look at the painting traditions, they are enormous by themselves. You're talking of Jangar, you're looking at the folk and tribal art. So India is literally a melting pot of ideas and what is happening. So when I look at what is happening with contemporary artists, I find literally a moving feast happening. I think India is full of talent. They are creating wonderful things. There's an exhibition in Bikaner House on indigo. There's an exhibition on textile art. There is Siddharth Das doing an exhibition on traditional imagery which he uses in the making of museums, because he designs museums and he's using traditional methodologies in his design philosophy. So India is literally a melting pot of creativity, of ideas. But what I think young Indians need to do is to look, literally turn the lens to themselves and look to India for inspiration, instead of trying to find a place in the sun in the ecosystem of Western gallery showings. Because I don't blame them, because they want to be seen and they want to be validated in the West. There are many artists in India who now don't even pretend to want to show in India. They're too busy. They want to show at the Venice Biennale. They want to show at the Tate Modern. They want to show in New York, which is also very, very important. But I think first you have to stand in Samabhang with your weight equal on both legs. 16 कलाओं के साथ संपूर्ण होके like Krishna, and then go to the rest of the world. Then the world is yours. The world is your oyster. So I think young Indians should study, read, and understand their own environment. If you are a Marathi, you understand all what is happening in your culture, then you understand what is happening in India, and then you can conquer the world. So today we have to stand with our head held high, because in India we wear multiple identities. Like me, I'm a woman, I'm from Kumaon, but I grew up in Delhi. So I'm not rural, I'm an urban woman, I'm a art historian, I'm a mother, I'm a professional. So which identity will I wear? I wear all, but I'm most comfortable being an Indian, not really being a Kumauni when I go in the white Western world. So, this is what we have to do with the arts as well. Be very, very comfortable in who you are, what you are. Do not look for validation from anybody else. Have faith in yourself, and then you are a winner.
So one of the things which India has been largely overwhelmed and world has been very overwhelmed in awe was about Indian erotica, and you have exhaustively kind of worked on it and kind of taken note of it. So, and then we see the current times, and and what we have seen earlier, even and it's again as you're saying that it was happening in theatre, sculptures, writings, music. So, but then there's a kind of a departure from there. That there's a kind of distancing in the way we see it now.
You mean you look at it as taboo?
I don't look at it as taboo.
No,
I'm just saying that, but there's a clear departure from the society that we don't own it as much as it was all over there, and it was kind of the whole world was talking about it all the time, and we are known as this. But then we don't kind of probably own it as much, or with that kind of a pride, belonging, delight.
So I rest my case. This is exactly what I was saying, that as an artist, we have to first take ownership. Now, with the Kama Sutra, I've written many interpretations and my own understanding of the Kama Sutra, and I did this fabulous show called The Spiritual and the Erotic on the Kama Sutra in Paris for 3 months, and how beautifully it was accepted by the city of love. But you think anybody will do it in India? No, they will think it's pornography. Again, it goes from lack of knowledge. People do not understand that the Kama Sutra is not a text about sexual positions. The Kama Sutra consists of 7 books, and only 1 book talks of sexual positions. All the rest of the 6 books are all about refined behavior. It's about righteous living. It's about interpersonal relationships between men and women. It's about the courtesan who held a very important place in society, and not like a commercial sex worker. A courtesan was a woman of immense taste, immense knowledge, immense skill. She knew all the 64 arts, and she had her own agency. When you think of Amrapali, the Nagar Vadhu of Vaishali, do you think of her as a commercial sex worker? No. She had a huge palatial place where she stayed. She had mango groves. She was actually found under a mango tree. That's why she was called Amrapali. But she ultimately gave up everything and her mango orchards and subsumed or bowed down to the teachings of Buddha. So she had her own agency. She was a empowered woman, and this was all what was happening in our ancient times. It is with the coming of the British that this kind of Western orthodox prudery came in. If you look at the pleasure albums, if you look at the temple facades, you see every aspect of sexual play on the temples, and nobody looks at it like pornography. Now, of course, there are people who would like to, they don't understand. They again come from a place of non-knowledge and they look at things differently. But you go today to Khajuraho and see that. It is actually a treatise on life.
Yes.
It is a celebration of women and womanhood, of women in their everyday activities, from taking a thorn out from her heel to putting coal in her eyes to adorning herself in the mirror and doing shringar, to also enjoying and having the pleasure of sexual gratification, which is very much part of life. And I think in the Hindu way of living, Dharma, Artha, Kama and Moksha are the 4 Purusharths of life. So Dharma is righteous living, Artha is how you make your money and have a good life, and Kama is sexual pleasure. And if you don't have a judicious balance of all these 3, how will you reach moksha? So I think the Hindu way of life is one of the most inclusive, evolved ways of living, and to besmirch it and call it pornography and give it bad terminologies and commodify women This is the doing of a non-educated mind.
So one thing I keep wondering about this, I grew up very near to this Khajuraho place. So and then you see.
बुंदेला हैं आप?
नहीं, मैं रीवा में पढ़ा.
अच्छा.
So one of the things which I kind of kept wondering that how, because there was no technology, there were no photographs, there were no paper to make those sketches. How did this whole thing happen over centuries and from here till Konark? So there's clearly a corridor kind of thing, and you can see Bharamdev in Chhattisgarh. And
no, it's there even in the deep south.
Yes. So, but then how was it? So it's like making of this whole mammoth kind of work which you do. How does this happen over the centuries, over generations? The people who are doing it, I mean, because we just know the people who commissioned these temples. We don't know that about this art which happened, and it would have been clearly a very collaborative kind of an act. So have you kind of worked around or thought about it?
So what I think is, the human mind is a fantastic mind and the human imagination is fabulous. So we get all our inspiration from what we see, the here and now, nature. If you read Ananda Kumaraswamy, he talks of transformation of nature into art. So you look at, how they say that her lips were as red as those of a pomegranate. The eyes were like that of a kamal. Ram ki to kehte hain Rajiv Lochan.
Yeah.
So therefore you take your inspiration and it is the imagination of the artist. The other thing you see is the stylistic development.
The templatization.
So all throughout. So when you look at these Nagar style temples, their manifestations and their canons were of the period. You look at the Chola temples, for example, in Tamil Nadu, you see a different kind of a physical representation. So that comes from the culture and it comes from the stylistic way and the body shapes of the Tamilians. You look at the Konarak temple, for example, the faces you see are more round. They look very much like the local faces of the Uriya women. Or you look at the Kangra paintings by beautiful Gaddan. They look very much like the women and the milkmaids who were there. So where did the artists get their inspiration from? They looked at the environment around, they looked at the women who were present, and then they made God was in the image of man. And the most beautiful Apsara is in the image of the women, beautiful women you see around. So that is how the artists got their inspiration. And it is also the Zeitgeist, the spirit of the times. Like when you see the beautiful Didarganj Yakshi and you look at her form and her face, she's very much like the Bihari women that you see around. So therefore, the sculptor who made that also got his inspiration from the women he saw. And the rest, the beautification, the shringar, all that comes, it's very distinct depending on who the artist was, because that depended and was directly connected with the aesthetics and the knowledge and the understanding of that particular artist.
So at Abir, we also have lots of young artists who kind of, we are part of their journey, and they make us a point of association with us. So I would want to hear from you, what do you tell them that, how, if they have next 20, 30, 40 years ahead of their career in art, how should they approach the oncoming journey for them?
They have to have total integrity to the craft. They should not sell out. When I say sell out, it's like doctors today in the private.
Shortchanging.
Yeah. Like you have the doctors in these private hospitals, they have targets to meet. I just met an artist who says, I used to do watercolors, but now I'm doing acrylic because, I've been rejected by certain galleries because I do watercolors and nobody's buying watercolors. Now, it depends on the artist. If it's a matter of hunger, change to acrylics. I'm not saying that. Experiment. But if you're changing to acrylics, do it with an integrity and a total honesty to the medium. But if you have a little bit of a cushion, don't give up what is integral to you. Do what pleases and which consumes you, because it is the passion which ultimately sees you through everything. When I enrolled for my fine art, my second MA, my first MA was in history. When I enrolled for my second MA in art history way back in 1981, which is almost 45 years ago, 43 years ago, somebody asked me, "ये क्या है? Finance? What is this? क्या कर रहे हैं आप?" And 2 years later, once I'd finished, and I was feeling very thrilled. One very successful bureaucrat tells me, "What are you going to do with this? What is it going to get you?" And today, I think it's got me so much. It's got me so much joy. It's got me so much of meeting different people. It's brought in an enrichment in my head. And when I look at that bureaucrat who passed that remark at me today, I see where he is and I see how alive I am. I rest my case.
It's also the significant role of curators in contemporary India, and especially in art scene, and we can see lots of new things happening. What do you talk about? How do you see the role of curators?
That's a loaded question, and I'm a little nervous to answer it.
You promise that you will be answering some, you'll speak your mind.
But I frankly will not care now.
Yeah, sure.
I think today everybody's become a curator. Now, what do you say to that? आजकल आप food भी curate कर रहे हो, आप party भी curate कर रहे हो. You are curating your dress also. So the word curator is an extremely overused word, right? Curator actually in the olden days was a keeper, the keeper of a museum, the keeper of a collection. Curar, it means to heal, to make a thing healthy. So when you look at curation, it is also a expertise. And this expertise also needs a lot of study. I'm not saying you need to do only art history. A physicist can also be a curator. But you need to know exactly about what is happening in society. What are the implications of various things? Like today, there is the most important thing which is, of great concern to all of us is ecology and environment, climate change. So today, a person of a museum suddenly who's looking after a manuscript of a collection can also become a curator of climate change and ecology, because if he studied all the palm leaf manuscripts and seen the flora and fauna and seeing the disappearance of that flora and fauna, can make a great curator of climate change and sustainability. But you need to have the right context and you need to have deep scholarship. You just can't be just using this fancy word curator, putting a group of 10 artists and their works together and saying, "मैंने तो show curate कर दिया." Lot more conceptual thought, reference, context. It reminds me of a lovely book which we were taught when I was doing my first MA in history. It's a small little book. I don't know if it's still available. It was called What is History by E.H. Carr. Now that book, somebody, if you just take that and say, what is curation? And say, it is a mix of history, sociology, anthropology, social behavior, so many things. And today, as a curator, you have to also decide what you want to curate. And it's better because you could have a primary focus. Like I like to do all my work because I've studied so much poetry, dance, music, gender and sexuality. So I'd like to do in the area of gender and sexuality more than in new areas. Of course I can do because I have the expertise. But for young curators, I would say, first know the literature. First educate yourself. And by educating, I don't mean degrees and doctorates and postdoctorates. I've done 2 MAs, PhD, postdoctoral. Yes, it helped me a lot. But my actual work emerged after my PhD, because that is there only to teach you the systems. The ability to think out of a box, that is the important thing after you know the language. It is important to know the language of curation and then think out of it, push the envelopes of creativity and then create a new product.
So how many shows a curator should be doing in a year?
It depends. If you want to be a commercial one, you can do 1 a month, no problem. And if you can do it, good for you.
Serious curator.
If you want to do a serious collection of a museum, for example, even a small thing, I would say a minimum of a year. A minimum, because you need to understand the objects, even if they're 200 objects, you need to write about them, you need to have a lead essay, you need to have captions, minimum, and that would be with at least 8 hours of work every day. I did one on women deities in the Bihar Museum. I curated an exhibition, and it took me that much time, and I worked every day for 8 hours at least.
Anything you want to ask?
So, one question I would like to ask. So, we talked about museums and the whole discourse around it. Uh, One thing I would like to touch upon is the incorporation of technology. So, museum is something we associate with antiquity and stuff, and technology is something which is futuristic and upcoming. So, how do you see the marriage of these two elements?
I think you cannot keep technology out at all. When I think of museums and antiquities, I think of the antiquity, and I don't like to think of technology coming in at all. Making a hologram of the Digarganj Yakshi is something which is not acceptable to me. But like when they're doing this Van Gogh experience everywhere, you can do that of a museum and take it by way of an immersive experience, and you can get a different kind of experience for it. But in a museum, the flow of energy and rasa which happens between the an- antique and the visitor is very special. Bringing in technology, you bring in another layer, another filter. It's like CMYK, it changes things. But having said that, technology makes things easier. So you have museums which are shown on Zoom. You can't go to the Met, but you can see the collection of the Met. So, by way of spreading information, by way of informing people, definitely technology will have a great, great role to play. You're getting metaverse now, you're getting all kinds of things now, and new media is taking on a completely new way of presentation, but the experience is different. It is not an immediate experience. I somehow feel the rasa changes, but technology cannot be taken out. It's a different experience.
So, continue with this question only. This is about the role of visitors. Like recently, we've been seeing antiquities and objects being destroyed, like while in the process of taking a selfie. So, what would you say to the visitors who are visiting a museum and they are not expert? And
No, some of them are doing as part of their activism as well. They are like throwing like paint on,
I don't know what do I say about people who want to
like
do selfies.
Museums are thinking of let's ban cameras and no selfies allowed. So do you think it's a right practice?
The selfie culture is really very annoying for me. Let me tell you, these people who are taking selfies, and I see them at the Bihar Museum too all the time, they don't even look at the object, and I just feel, चलो selfie ले रहे हैं तो शायद कभी ना कभी जहन में आ जाए. But that's a different, selfie going public is different. I do think that there has to be a judicious balance. Maybe if you make them pay, like in foreign museums, you get a big fat fee to take your camera in, it'll be a deterrent. But if you take your mobile and everywhere you are taking selfies, people have no respect. And we in India, we have so much art and culture. You kick a stone and a fossil emerges. It is so rich. So we don't respect. We don't respect it. We are really, you go to old monuments, वहाँ लव का साइन लगाया हुआ है, just for the sake of it. I don't understand. Must be some kind of a mental whatever. But the point is that I do think we have to also educate the people in being, respecting your own culture. So once that happens, once that education happens, why does it not happen in Singapore? वहाँ तो खैर a lot of fines are done. So if we start finding people, we make things, we make rules, maybe it will help. And in the museums, definitely, I think there should be a fat fee for taking in cameras, and I think mobile phones to leke nahi jana chahiye. You go to the Uffizi gallery, you can't, there's a fee for your phones, but I didn't see anybody going close by doing that. Everybody had a respectable, distance. So people respect the artwork. That is again education. That is a kind of pride in your culture. I don't know why we need to work in that area in India.
Thank you so much, Dr. Pandey. It was such a delight and very long conversation. We will come back to you again, and I think the viewers of Abir Pothi will also be able to read it on our site, and this will be a good reference point for lots of young artists and students of art. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you.